Hello, I'm Tom from the Bartitsu lab, and in this video we'll be looking at the Smatchet. The Smatchet is a lesser known World War II knife. This is very much, if I take my trainer here, so this is my blunt training version, as you can see, compared to the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, which we will most likely be familiar with, the Smatchet is a broad-bellied, double-bladed knife. It's double-edged, can cause carnage from either side, true edge and false edge, comes to a wicked point, has a robust pommel. Overall, it's a solid bit of gear, it's a solid bit of kit. And if you imagine if you're a face-to-face shock troop, if you're coming to grips with the enemy, I would much rather have this than the more traditional FS model of knife. Face-to-face, this has a lot more options available to me than perhaps the others do, as well as the utility elements that this opens up. But let's look at it in context. In context, if I needed to use a knife because knife was the best tool, because it's silent, doesn't matter what knife I'm using, really. Doesn't matter what knife at all. But let's also look at this from a face-to-face angle. So if you think of most people, they would have had a long arm, they would have had potentially a sidearm, and the knife or the Smatchet is the tertiary tool. So imagine ammunition has run out on the long arm. On the sidearm, let's imagine I've got a stovepipe, it's gone wrong, it's jammed. Something has gone awry with this weapon. So, I have to rely on this. By the time I rely on this, I might already be this close to the enemy. So, drawing from a distance is easy. Knife comes out, use it. But I'd say a great neglected set of drills is, when you get very, very close, how can I bring this to bear? And once I've brought it to bear, how do I use it in a compound fashion? And what I mean by compound fashion is, how do I add the techniques together? Because much of knife work isn't about technique A, technique B, technique C. It's about ABC done in a fluid way, cutting, stabbing, thrusting your way through an enemy. It's dynamic, it's holistic. Much like other areas of Fairbairn, you learn the alphabet, A, B, C, whether it's unarmed or armed, and then you need to start to string words together, sentences, write poetry. You mix up the language of fighting. So, back to my original point. Drawing a knife and using a knife at range is relatively easy. You know the opponent's coming. But let's say the opponent has surprised you, or your primary and tertiaries haven't worked, and the enemy's upon you. How do you access this weapon? Fairbairn advises the crossdraw, which is absolutely fine. Makes sense to have your decent secondary here. So, first thing I advise is, when you get this close, it's very easy for my weapon to become our weapon, for him to grab it. So I'd advise making sure that you throw something at the man. Throw something to hurt, disorientate him, whilst you take your hips back. So you understand? It's no good just putting my hand here. It's no good just putting my hips back, because it'll keep going. It's the notion of hitting him and withdrawing my hips from the scene. So if you imagine step one, you've hit him, you've withdrawn your hips. By withdrawing your hips, you've also made a really good flight path for this particular tool. So you've made a way to draw that nice and easy. You've caused him to stop because you've hit him, let's in this instance say, with your palm, bam, in the face, fingers in the eyes. It could have been an edge of hand blow. I prefer this, and maintain some contact. Don't just be percussive, maintain some contact with this. So if you imagine, let's get this here. Soon as I realise that we're at this close range, strike and withdraw the hips, and the hands on the blade. At that juncture, you then draw the blade. So this is sticking because my sheath, in this instance, is very new, and this blade has yet to tell it who's boss. So I'm going to have it on a half draw just for now, okay? In a couple of videos' time, this leather would have been battered to all hell, and it'll come out nice and lovely. But for now, if you do point any issues about this being half drawn, it's because the leather is very new, and you need to break it in. Right, so we end up here, we end up in a close clash of bodies. Withdraw the hips, index the weapon, make him hurt, disrupt his energy, disrupt his flow towards you. From here, so hips drawn back, hand in the face. Now we're able to draw the Smatchet. Okay, so now we've drawn the Smatchet. There are a number of ways to do this type of cross draw. For example, if he attacked me from the side, I need to deal with him with my predominant hand and then potentially draw it with my weaker hand. So it's another thing, whilst this is a cross-draw weapon, if the enemy attacks from this side, I can't really turn and draw this. He'll beat me the fuck up. So what I need to do is I need to hit him with something, draw it this way, and then use the tool. Whoa. Now this is not an ideal way to use the Smatchet, but it's the most efficient way. If I've turned side on, I need to stop him crashing into me, so I need to give him something serious to chew on. Draw on this, in, out, nice and simple. When opportune, you may wish to switch it to a familiar grip, but in a pinch, bear in mind everything in these combatives is to be done in a pinch. If he attacks from this side, so I chop, I index the weapon, I maintain contact, keeping him off balance, draw, then use the weapon. Okay? There is no point in me trying to fumble around on a cross draw from the side. It's not going to happen. He's got two arms just to collapse me in. I'm better off twatting him right across the throat, keeping that pressure on, drawing the tool, doing him in. So, just some useful exercises. Front on, I'd advise hitting with the left hand, indexing with the right on the cross draw. I can bring it into play, making sure the hips are back. If he attacks from the side, you notice my hips still go back. From here. So my hips still retreat. I take the weapon and the utility away from him. I hit him with something hard. I've maintained pressure, drawn the blade, finished him with the blade. So your drawing methodology is something you should really, really practice because it's really, really important. So whether it's strike, hips back, cross draw, or whether from the side, edge of hand blow, this type of ice pick draw, doesn't really matter. What matters is I've kept the weapon out of his hands, I've injured him and stopped him advancing, I've drawn a useful weapon with which I can finish the encounter. But more traditionally would be the hit to the face, the hips back, the cross draw. Once you've nailed that, then you can start to explore from the cross draw, a bit like you might see in arts like Iaido. When I draw it, this first motion should also be a cut or a thrust. Soon as this leaves the belt, it needs to start inflicting damage on old Nazi Bob over here. So let's imagine, in the first instance, we'll go from this drill. Hips back, I'm out here. My first cut, I'm now going to draw from the sheath and do an upwards diagonal cut. Straight upwards into the jugular, into the arteries, in the eye line. Whatever's happening, I'm coming up this way, coming up that way. So whatever's in my path gets hit with this, making sure that you don't waste that shot on the body. This is another reason why your hips come out. My hips are out now, so I've got room to get him in the face, to get him in the neck. If I don't put my hips out, if I just hit him, this just hits a whole lot of body and does a whole lot of nothing. So the hips coming out is really important for you to draw and cut something useful. So, one, like so. One, like so. Hips back allows you the space and time and choice to then decide go to neck, go to eye line, go to something important. Now I talked about compounds. So if you imagine one cut up here, what we're now going to do is we're now going to take a step back. So you imagine here, my right leg's forward. What I'm going to do is if this hasn't put him out the game, in this instance, if I'm the one with the knife, space is my friend. If I'm in the ideal zone to be using this knife, I don't want to end up in this fucked up tangle, this close-up tangle. So, hips back, draw the knife. Do an immediate instinctive cut, much like you do instinctive point shooting. Instinctive cut to the eye line or to the throat. Once that's done, I step my right leg back for a forehand cut along the side of the neck. So to super slow that down, stop him, hips back, index the weapon, draw and cut instinctively, making sure I move my hand out the game. I don't want to cut my own arm. My hand out the game. I take a little step back with my right leg to cut again. One. So we're cutting here. making sure that we use the full extension of the weapon and ideally cut them with the sweet spot of the weapon. So from here, hips back index, instinctive cut, step back, cut to the neck. So 1, 2. 1, 2. I always advise at the end of the drill, putting your palm out there against his right shoulder, so that if he had his own blade, his own weapon, his own pistol, whatever it is, you're jamming that shoulder to make sure it's very hard for him to bring to bear. So, hips back and index, instinctive cut, step back, here. 1, 2. Here. 1, 2. And then we stop him again if we're close. Other compound draws would be from here. We do a backhand draw. So again, hip, index, backhand draw. So we're drawing it here. We're going to go backhand. We're going to do a small loop, and we're going to backhand again. So for example, I might go eye line to make him flinch or stay there, expose his neck for another backhand. So backhand, backhand. Does that make sense? Don't know why I'm saying that, you can't respond. Backhand, instinctive cut. Backhand, instinctive cut. Eyes to throat, throat to eyes. Typically if you aim for the eyes, it's a really good instinctive one and makes people do this, allowing you the small rotation to do a secondary backhand to the throat. You may wish, if you end up closer than you like anyway, so you've done your best, you've fired your shot, you've drawn your hips, you're kind of here, you've done a cross draw, but he's just very strong and he's collapsing you. Get used to draw and having a body supported thrust. So a body supported thrust is essentially any thrust where the pommel of the weapon is on your mass. So I can drive it forward with my own body weight. Typically works best with a clothing or a head attachment. So if I've drawn and he's just too close, I can't cut him. I bring that point to bear like a Roman gladius. I put it against my body and then I drive into the opponent. I use my body to drive the weapon. A mass supported thrust, using my body to draw the weapon. So if we end up, I do my best, I withdraw my hips, I get the knife out at least. And that's why the hips and the striking is important, but there's just not enough room. I turn it to be point on the enemy, drive my body into it. Then I can withdraw and do all this nice, lovely, choppy stuff. You may also find, if you draw it and you're very close, so I've drawn it, I've hips back and index as much as I possibly can, I've drawn it, no dice, and I can't get it down here. Maybe for body armour, there might be some reason why I can't go down here. Then I turn the knife blade up. So again, the dangerous bit is starting to point scarily towards his throat. So from here, I draw, blade up. I can then do a punch thrust. So I can just immediately stab this up into his throat. Boom. Or use the pommel upwards. So in this instance, we've hit, hips back, index, we've drawn, we're turning the point upwards under his chin to do a punch thrust, or we're going to hit him with the pommel. Bang. One of the reasons I don't hugely like the pommel with the Smatchet is if I cock it up or he grabs hold of me, suddenly my own blade is facing towards me or near enough to be scary. So whilst I can hit him upwards with the pommel, and you do see this, it does put me somewhere in the danger zone of my own weapon. Whereas that immediate punch thrust, I've drawn, blade up, bam, up here, he's in the scary place for the weapon. Okay? We can also look at things like we index, we hit back, we draw the weapon, we do our instinctive back cut, but let's imagine between this and anything else, he closes the distance, he gets very close. Here is where we can use the pommel. Smash that straight down into the orbital bone, the eye socket, on the jawbone, on the collarbone, whatever. So we draw, he closes, so we make a good attachment. Might as well have control if it's close. and then we use the pommel. I'd advise when you're practicing using the pommel to practice stamping with the foot as well. It's an easy compound. A, the stamp allows you to put force and mass behind that pommel blow, and B, you can also be crushing the small bones in his foot. So as we draw and cut and collapse, attach, stamp on his foot, smash him with the pommel. But all of these things come from the correct drawing drill. Ideally, you make space with an instinctive backhand, then you can forehand or you can double backhand, you can do other things from there. Also very, very important that when you end up close, don't neglect the blade. A lot of people when they get up close, they just start to think in terms of pommels and wrestling. Yes, you should, and you should be able to wrestle, but the wrestling should open up the opportunity, arm drag him, to get the blade on point to do it. This finishes the job much faster. So if you've got it, make sure you use it. But I'd say overall, a very neglected area of Smatchet use is being able to draw it from the front, hit back index, and then draw, or from the side, chop, ice pick draw, use the weapon. These are important things, keeping weapon safe, weapon retention, making space and allowing you to do things with the knife. And then also remember, once the knife is out, being able to cut to a thrust is important. So practice cuts that lead to thrusts, cuts that lead to thrusts, and thrusts that lead to cuts. Try and keep the knife within the frame of your body, just outside the frame of your shoulders maximum here, but in reality, the best work is done nice and tight. Cuts to thrusts, thrusts to cuts. It's very, very important. The closer you get, the more important the elbow raise is. So if we end up here and I need to make a quality cut, I need to raise my elbow somewhat to allow myself to deliver that cut. Raising the elbow, deliver the cut. Raise the elbow, deliver the cut. It allows me to make that short, sharp, circular cut, which is very important if we're very close range. If we're not close range, one, you can snap cut it. You can lean in and chop this way. If you're at very close range, halo yourself, this haloing motion, and then cut. So if you're not very close and you can't work the point in or the point's defective, halo the cut, boom, straight from here. But working thrusts to cuts, thrusts to cuts, and cuts to thrusts, cuts to thrusts is very important for Smatchet work because they flow very beautifully. Do experiment with that. And also experiment with using your offhand or your off limbs. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a hit of withdraw my hips from here. This is a hit of withdraw my hips. Withdrawn. But also mid-flow, the end of the combination, whatever you've been doing, be ready to strike, to shoulder check. When you're up close, remember to knee the groin, stamp the foot, drive in the head, smash in the elbow. Every piece of your World War II defender, everything you do, chin jabs, tiger claws, knees to the groin, they can all flow within the confines of using the blade. When you're using the blade, don't forget the rest of your body allows you to do what I like to call interstitial strikes. If you imagine, every time I use the blade is a beat. 1, 2, 3. When I put my hand in the mix, it's coming in on the half beats, just to keep him feeling like he's in a tumble dryer with a brick. He's always in pain. Cut, hit, cut. Allowed stuff to hit, disorientate, hurt, alarm him, keep him off balance. That's why you should use your head, your elbows, your tiger claws, your palm heels, your knees, your stomps, all in that holistic system. I'll go into more detail about the Smatchet later. This has been quite a long video. Hope you found it useful, but if you take anything away, it's making sure that you practice good drawing discipline from the front, from the side, and then know how to flow from an immediate instinctive cut or thrust into something else. This has been the Smatchet. I've been Tommy Moore. Thank you.